For several weeks, Petey's weakened body fought the infection. Joe made sure every attendant knew what special care was needed. He assigned Calvin the job of dispensing water and keeping Petey's face wiped with a damp cloth. In time, Petey dreaded seeing Calvin approach with more water. So diligent was Calvin at dispensing fluids that nearly every hour an attendant had to change Petey's wet pads. Calvin stroked Petey's forehead and face until the skin became raw and Joe had to curb his zeal. Petey slipped in and out of consciousness, sweating, then shivering. Calvin's constant babble annoyed him. He wished his chubby friend would just go away and let him drift into a deep, endless sleep. During Petey's long illness, Joe often stopped after his shift to sit and talk. Petey clung doggedly to consciousness, trying to listen. One night, as the big man stood warily to leave, Petey deliberately grunted the words, "Goo-ba-cho." Joe looked down, surprised. "You can say my name?" Petey nodded, smiling weakly. Joe looked down in a puzzled silence. "Good night, Petey. It's been real good talking," he said. Petey nodded. Joe's walk was unsteady, and his shoulders sagged as he left the ward. Petey remained deathly ill, overwhelmed with the hacking coughs, chills, and delirium. When the first sign of recovery came, it happened under the cover of night. Petey stopped, his restless shivering, and fell into a deep, heavy sleep. When morning tried to wake him, sleep reclaimed his body several times. He finally awoke feeling hunger, his first hunger in over a month. Soon, Petey and Calvin again played cowboys by the hour, clicking and clicking at each other in mock battle. In the spirit of sportsmanship, Calvin tried to not sound any louder than Petey. Once in a while, however, he screamed loudly in the frenzy of battle. Bang, bang, bang. When every eye in the ward turned towards him, he'd lower his head and return meekly to a subdued kee, kee, kee. With the coming of winter, cold winds clawed at the ward once more. The furnace cycled frantically against the relentless chill. One snowy evening, Joe visited the ward. While patients prepared for bed, he stopped beside Petey and Calvin, a bag in his arms. "Hey guys, you know what day it is?" Petey and Calvin looked up curiously. "Tuesday?" Calvin ventured. No. I mean, what's special about this day?" "Today we had jelly sandwiches." Joe shook his head. "Well, what?" Joey grunted. "It's Christmas Eve." Seeing the boys' blank stares, Joe explained. "Listen, you guys, Christmas is a time of peace, happiness, and celebration. This is when we remember that all people are brothers and sisters." "We don't have no family," Calvin said glumly. "You have me. That's why I came here tonight, to bring you gifts." Joe pulled out 2 colorfully wrapped packages from his bag. He held them back from Calvin's impatient reach. "You can't open them until morning, when I come on shift. That way you have all night to dream about them. Dreaming is half the fun." Petey and Calvin looked at each other, giddy with excitement. "You know what these are?" Joe asked, pulling 2 big socks from the pocket of his heavy jacket. "Yeah," Calvin blurted. "Big, dirty socks." Joe laughed. "These are more than big, dirty socks. We're going to hang them up in the nurse's station. If you've both been good this year, maybe Santa Claus will put candy in them. I'll help you check them in the morning." "Santa Claus is a big, fat guy dressed in red," Calvin announced. "And he gives presents to good people," Joe added. When Joe first mentioned Christmas, Petey had not been excited. Now, with the prospect of socks and presents, he grinned widely. He could not envision the toys most children conjured up. But this did not dampen the intrigue. Late into the night, he grunted excitedly. Calvin announced repeatedly, "I think I'm going to get a horse." After threats from other wary patients, Petey and Calvin drifted into a fitful but enchanted sleep. They dreamed about brightly colored boxes, dirty socks, and a big fat guy dressed in red. Long before wake-up call, Calvin called loudly, "Hey, Petey, it's Christmas. Today we get our presents." Petey opened his eyes, instantly awake and fully aware of the suspense this day held. "You two shut up," growled one of the patients, "or you won't live to open the presents." Quietly, the boys waited. Finally, Joe arrived for his 6 a.m. shift. He walked slowly, like an old man. Calvin hollered to him as he entered the ward. "Hey, Joe, it's Christmas." Joe gasped, faking surprise. "It is? Well, let's get up and about then. No presents till after breakfast." Devouring the fastest meal ever consumed on the ward, Petey and Calvin waited anxiously as Joe finished his duties. After what seemed like eternity, Joe finally accompanied the boys to the nurse's station. First, he placed a gift on Petey's chest. Petey gave him a helpless, expectant look. "I'm not opening that for you," Joe said. Aye," Petey squeaked his concern. "I'll help, but you gotta help too." Joe lifted Petey's limp hand and held one of his stiff fingers like the letter opener. Petey stared as he felt his fingers rip open the paper. Calvin squirmed impatiently, like a puppy with bacon dangling in front of his nose. With Petey's gift almost open, Joe handed Calvin his. Calvin treaded the wrapped box instantly. Both boys had received a leather holster and belt. Each holster held a brand new silver toy pistol. "Oh boy, Petey, look at these," Calvin shrieked. Petey grinned and flapped his arms. "Oh boy." Joe smiled, watching the two boys. As Calvin put his belt on, Joe reached over and mounted Petey's holster on the side of his wheelchair. Carefully, he attached the pistol to Petey's wrist with rubber bands. Immediately, the boys started a fusillade of and kee. Luckily, Petey didn't have to aim well, or his bullets would have to hit the ceiling. Joe smiled as he watched his young friends play. Had they not been crippled and confined to this asylum, they were old enough now to drive cars, date, play sports, and get jobs. An intense joy filled Joe as he watched Petey sit stationary in the middle of the room with Calvin, lunging his wheelchair around in circles. Both teenagers clicked their throats furiously, arms swinging. Calvin halted his play. "Joe, how about the socks?" Joe shrugged. "I don't know, Calvin. They might be empty. Santa only leaves things for people who are good." "We've been good. At least I have," Calvin vowed. "I don't know about Petey." Joe looked over at Petey. "Well, have you been good?" A smile flooded Petey's face, and his arms jerked wildly. Prefer goo. Joe retrieved the two socks stuffed with candy. In Petey's socks, Joe had added a small framed piece of paper. "What?" Petey asked, looking at the framed paper. "That, Petey, is a special gift for you." What? "Here, I'll read it to you," Joe read slowly. "They who wait for the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint." "What's an eagle?" Calvin blurted. "Well, it's like the pigeons we have around here, only much bigger," Joe explained. "Joe, I like pigeons better," Calvin commented. "Don't you, Petey? Cripes, are they fast?" I. Joe looked at the two boys and shook his head, chuckling. "Okay, we'll fix that." He grabbed a pen from the nurse's station and made a correction on the framed paper. "Okay, how does this sound? They shall mount up with wings like pigeons." "Yeah, that's better," Calvin exclaimed. "What do you think, Petey?" Joe inquired. "I prefer goo. Later that day, during a lull in one of their pitched battles, Petey motioned for Calvin to come near. "What do you want, Petey?" Calvin asked. Petey motioned towards the shredded Christmas paper and the socks filled with candy. Next, he motioned towards Joe, working at the far end of the ward. "Kma, kma." Petey repeated insistently. After puzzling a minute, Calvin realized that Petey wanted to give Joe a Christmas present. With an air of mischief, both boys donated candy from their socks, and Calvin wrapped it awkwardly in the biggest piece of colored paper they could salvage. Then, hiding it behind his back, Calvin yelled, "Hey, Joe, come here." When Joe arrived, Calvin thrust the hidden gift forward. "It's from me and Petey." "What in the world is this?" Joe feigned surprise as he opened the little bundle and discovered the candy. "Merry Christmas," Calvin blurted. Reaching down, Joe hugged each boy. "Merry Christmas, you two. A bountiful Merry Christmas."